Chapter 14, Families. So this chapter covers several different concepts from the impact of families on adults, how it impacts children, adolescents, infants, lots and lots of good ideas in here, lots of things that you guys probably have experienced. So I really encourage you to read this chapter, lots of good stuff in here. I'm going to start with Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner had an ecological theory. What he did was he broke it down into 5 different environmental systems. We've already covered this earlier in the book, but I'm going to go over it again. He said that there were 5 systems: the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. I did notice that there were several questions on these on the quiz, so I want to go over them really quickly. The mesosystem is the setting in which the individual lives. So for example, my mesosystem is my nuclear family. When I'm at work, it is what my environment at work. When I'm at church, it is my church environment. It's wherever I am. It's the system where I am. The mesosystem is what links between my microsystems. So for example, with my daughter, when she is at home and then when she's at school, the link between them is me. I am within her microsystem at home, but then when she's at school, I am forever calling and emailing her teacher. I'm very involved with her school environment. So the mesosystem, that link, is me being very involved. And what we found is the stronger that mesosystem, the stronger those links, the better for the child. And you can just imagine, I mean, there are some children who, I mean, I hate to say it like this, but their parents don't even know who the teachers are. I mean, that would be an extreme example. But then there's others that, you know, those mesosystems are strong. So if you have strong mesosystems where the church is involved with the school, is involved with the home life, is involved with the friends, those mesosystems, those links, that's what we want. So Bronfenbrenner went through these different systems. I just want you to take a look at them in the book if you're not familiar. Like I said, we've already gone through them before in earlier chapters. I just wanted to highlight them very quickly. Every family is a system. It's a complex whole made up of several interrelated and interacting parts. Couple concepts here that I want you to just, you can read over in the book. Make sure that you study these. I saw a couple questions about these. Scaffolding I want to highlight because I did see several questions about this. Scaffolding is the adjusting of the level of guidance to fit the child's performance. So for example, if you are playing Candy Lane, if you ever played that game with a toddler, you would provide a lot more guidance, a lot more guidance for a child when you're playing that. You would make sure that they took turns. You would help them a lot through that game, and that would be scaffolding. But then if you were playing Go Fish with, let's say, an 8-year-old, you wouldn't be giving nearly as much scaffolding. I mean, you might need to provide some assistance. But that idea of scaffolding, it's very similar to the educational idea of scaffolding, where you provide the amount of support that's needed for that particular child. And it can be different depending, in fact, it should be different depending on that child. So you would provide different amounts of support dependent on what that child needs. Key concept on this slide, marital satisfaction often leads to good parenting. There's been a lot of studies that show that marital satisfaction actually takes a dive after the birth of a child. In other words, that idea that, oh, we're going to have a baby and that's going to improve the marital satisfaction, it doesn't happen. So one thing that a couple can do to improve their parenting is actually working together to improve their marital satisfaction. So if they're happy as a couple, it leads to better parenting. And there's a slide here. I'll go to the next one. That just demonstrates that if you have a strong marital relationship, it leads to better parenting, and the better parenting and better child development actually can help then with the marital relationship and the parenting. So it's all interrelated. So spending time as a couple, very important. Your book then goes into some changes that have occurred over the years as far as when families are deciding to have children. Parenthood is taking place earlier for some. We do have very young teen parents, but then we also have older parents. So some statistics here. One thing that I found interesting is that older fathers tend to be warmer, they tend to be better communicators, they tend to encourage more achievement, they tend to be more lax in enforcing rules, they show less rejection with their children than younger fathers. So, I mean, some of these good, some of these we could use some improvement on, but there's definite differences between older fathers and the very young fathers. We've already talked about this in the class, but parenting calls on a number of interpersonal skills and makes intense emotional demands, yet there's little in the way of formal education. Most parents learn parenting practices from their own parents. Husband and wives bring different views of parenting into marriage. I'll tell you, I mean, it's amazing. People have very different views from, should we spank? Should a child eat what's on their plate? Should bedtime be at a set time? Should there be one book read or more? I mean, as a marriage counselor, I have heard probably, every time I think I've heard it all, there's something new that comes up. But then you take people that have an idea of what should happen, and then you put them together and they have a baby, and then they're trying to navigate. And most people, in fact, I'd say almost everyone, they want what's best for their child, but all they know is the way that they were raised. That's what they're basing their parenting on. And then if there's some friction within the marriage, and it's trying to navigate all of this, it can become really difficult. Add in there a little bit of sleep, the stress that's going on. It can be very, very difficult. Of course, as the baby grows, the developmental changes, what they need changes. Obviously, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old have different needs, different abilities. The competent parent adapts to these changes. The competent parent knows what the differences are. So let's first talk about infancy and early childhood. The first year parent-child interaction is routine caregiving. So we have routine caregiving, changing diapers, bathing, soothing. We then go into the second year and the third year, and now we start to have disciplinary matters. So now the child, there's some mischievousness. We need to worry about the child getting into things, the child hurting themselves. We need to make sure that the environment is safe. We now see some spanking. I'm going to mention now that there have been numerous studies that say that spanking under 2 years old is not okay. I'll tell you, I'm not a fan of spanking to begin with, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but under 2, not recommended across the board. Under age 2, the child does not have the cognitive ability to comprehend everything that's going on. And when you're spanking a child who's under 2, what you're teaching them is simply what not to do. That's not teaching them what they should do instead. And there's a lot of studies that show that that is linked with later aggression and later psychological problems. So the child grows older. The parents increasingly turn to reasoning, giving or withholding special privileges, When the child starts moving toward elementary years, the parents start showing them less physical affection. The child interactions during early childhood focus on matters such as modesty, bedtime regulations, control of temper, fighting with siblings. Let me tell you, I know something about that. Peers, eating behaviors, manners, autonomy and dressing, attention seeking. So we started with, diaper changing to getting into everything to now we're trying to teach the child how to manage themselves. So here's basically what I just said. I'm going to leave this slide up for a second. It's just listed a little bit easier for you to, if you're taking notes, for you to write down. We have modesty, bedtime regularities, control of temper, fighting with siblings, eating behaviors, manners, autonomy and dressing, attention seeking. So this will be early childhood. Once we hit middle and late childhood, the parents are spending less time with them. Parents especially play an important role in supporting and stimulating the children's academic achievement in middle and late childhood because now we're in school. The value that the parents place on education can literally mean the difference between whether children do well in school or not. Parental involvement is crucial. Parents not only influence the children's in-school achievement, but they also make decisions about the children's out-of-school activities. For example, whether or not they participate in extracurricular activities, their friends, what they're doing. So the parents are still very involved, but it's more of a hands-off. They don't need to monitor every little move they make, but the parents are still really important. What we find is elementary school children tend to receive less physical discipline. During middle and late childhood, some control is transferred from parent to child, and we call this co-regulation. In other words, they're working together to regulate. The parents continue to exercise general supervision and control, while children are allowed to engage in moment-to-moment self-regulation. And there's a major shift in autonomy that does not occur to about age 12 or later. I'm going to give you an example of co-regulation because I did see a quiz question about that. So co-regulation would be if the child did something wrong, instead of, giving them a spanking or just sending them to their room, the parent might talk to the child about what happened and attempt to educate them on how to do something different. So they might say, well, I see that you hurt so-and-so's feelings. How do you think that might be different this way? And they try to educate and work together to make a change. So that's co-regulation. Lots of questions about this on the quiz. Diana Baumrein in 1971 came up with some different styles of parenting, and we still talk about them today. And basically what she did was she described 4 different types of parenting: authoritarian, authoritative, neglectful, and indulgent. Now, the way I remember authoritarian, to me, authoritarian sounds like dictarian. Now, I know that's not a real word, but what authoritarian is they really are like a dictator. And it's my way or the highway. So that's a restrictive, punitive style in which the parent forces the child to follow rules. It's my way or the highway. You need to do what I say or else. And children from authoritative parents often feel unhappy, fearful, anxious. They fail to initiate activity because, of course, they're afraid that if they do the wrong thing, immediate punishment. They don't take initiative because they're always told what to do. They have weak communication skills because they don't voice their opinion because they're told what to do. Authoritative is the style that we want. This style encourages parents to be, or children, I'm sorry, to be independent and still place limits and controls on their actions. There's a lot of verbal give and take, but parents are warm and nurturing toward their children. They show pleasure and support in response to constructive behavior. There's still rules, there's boundaries, but the parent is still loving and nurturing. The key to authoritative parenting is rules, boundaries, consistency, done in a loving, supportive way. And that is authoritative parenting. Neglectful parenting is a style in which the parent is uninvolved in the child's life. This could happen if the parent had, let's say, a mental health issue, drugs and alcohol, the parent was ill-equipped to be a parent. So these children grow up to be socially incompetent, they have poor self-control, they don't handle independence well, they just have this sense that their parents' lives are more important than they are because their parents pretty much their parents go on living their lives and they don't provide the parenting that the children needed. Now, at the time, the children may really like it because there's no parenting going on, and what 10-year-old, they might really like that they don't have that type of parenting. They get to do what they want. They get to watch TV when they want. They get to do whatever they want. It's neglectful parenting. But they really grow up to have poor self-control because, when you get to do what you want when you want, and then you enter the real world and the rules are different. I mean, we all have certain rules and there's certain things that we can do and we can't do, and we don't get immediate gratification. We have to follow these rules. And if you haven't grown up in that way, it can be really difficult. And the fourth style of parenting is indulgent parenting. And this is a style in which the parents are highly involved with their children, but they place few demands or controls on them. So you can think of sort of like spoiling the child. The parents let their children do what they want. They hover over their children, but the children they never learn to control their own behavior. And the children always expect to get their own way. And I see I missed a Y at the end of that. But the children, it's actually sort of a form of abuse in a way, and I don't mean abuse in the standard way, but the children never learn to, how the real world works. They get what they want when they want it. They have a parent who's always there cheering them on, go, everything's wonderful, but then when they get in trouble, they don't get in trouble. And that would be an indulgent parent. Now, the thing is, I just told you these four styles of parenting, and I want you to pause for a second and think, well, what type of parenting did I grow up with? And most likely, your parents didn't fit into a nice, neat box of one of these. They probably had certain times when they were one of them, and then other times when they were different. For example, I tend to be authoritative, but there are certain things that I am authoritarian. There are certain times, there are certain things that it's non-negotiable. So don't think of this as, it has to always be this way. What we're looking for is patterns. So if most of the time the parents are indulgent, then you could put them into this indulgent category. If most of the time the parents are neglectful, and then every once in a while, all of a sudden they start parenting their child, and then they go back to being neglectful, I would categorize them as neglectful. So we're looking for patterns. So to finish up with the indulgent parenting, the children who have parents who are indulgent rarely learn respect for others. They have difficulty controlling their behavior. They tend to be domineering, egocentric, non-compliant. They have difficulties in peer relations. If you think about it, it's because they're used to getting things their way when they want it, just things handed to them. They're not used to having to follow rules. They're used to dominating everything. So this makes sense. Your book talks a little bit about how different ethnic groups are linked with different parenting styles. The authoritative is linked with a whole wide range of ethnic, social strata, cultures, family structures. We see that everywhere. Authoritarian, um, we can also see that. So you might want to take a look through your book to see how it kind of breaks down with different groups. So let's talk about punishment. Interestingly enough, individuals in the United States and Canada tend to be those with the most favorable attitudes toward corporal punishment, and corporal punishment means physical punishment. So we tend to be the ones with the most favorable attitudes toward corporal punishment, and we tend to remember it having been used against us. So if I was to poll the class, how many of you remember being spanked? Chances are the majority of you were. And despite the widespread use of corporal punishment, there have been surprisingly few research studies on physical punishment. I mean, believe me, they're out there, but not enough of them. So just to give you an idea of corporal punishment, we have South Korea, and then we have the United States right there, and then Spain and Sweden. So the attitude and remembering if it was used against us, United States is really high up there. So why do we spank our kids? Well, I'll tell you why. Because it's linked with higher levels of immediate compliance. You spank your child, they're going to listen to you right away. And we like that. In America, we like immediate results. And I'll tell you, the research concludes that corporal punishment by parents is associated with higher levels of immediate compliance. The downside, it's also linked with aggression. So children who have been spanked are more likely to be aggressive. Also, studies have shown that a history of harsh physical discipline is related to adolescent depression, externalized problems such as juvenile delinquency. So spanking, it's a kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you get immediate results, which feels good to the parent. But on the other hand, it comes along with some baggage that may not be good. I'm just going to throw out some reasons to avoid spanking. When an adult punishes a child by screaming, yelling, spanking, they're presenting children with an out-of-control model for handling a stressful situation. It's kind of funny, but do you see the irony? As an adult, we can't control our stress, and we're screaming at a child and then hitting them, but then we expect the child to not do the same. And children imitate. If you remember Bandura in social psychology, they may intimidate this aggressive, out-of-control behavior. The punishment can instill fear, rage, and avoidance. Punishment tells the child what to not do instead of what to do. And, of course, there's the risk of being abusive. What we like to see is timeouts, removing of privileges. I'll tell you, this debate of how to punish children, it will continue to go on. If we were in an actual classroom, we could spend the entire period discussing it. I'll tell you, my experience, when parents tell me that timeout doesn't work, 99% of the time, they're not doing it consistently. And if it's not done consistently, immediately, and it does take a lot more resources to do it, it's quicker to spank. So if they're not doing the timeout correctly, it's not going to work. So we're going to move into child abuse, child maltreatment. Maltreatment is another word for abuse. We have way too much of that. 84% of children who are abused by their parent or parents. We use the term child abuse to refer to both abuse and neglect. Developmentalists use the term child maltreatment. which does not have the impact of the term abuse and acknowledges that it includes diverse conditions. So you'll see throughout these slides child abuse, child maltreatment. So let's go through these. There are 4 main types. We have physical abuse, child neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. Physical abuse is characterized by the infliction of physical injury resulting from punching, beating, kicking, biting, burning, shaking, or otherwise harming the child. The parent or other person may not have intended to hurt the child, and the injury may have resulted from excessive physical punishment. So in other words, it doesn't matter if the person meant to hurt the child or not. The bottom line is the child was hurt. Child neglect. This is characterized by a failure to provide for the child's basic needs. Neglect can be physical, such as abandoning the child, educational. Chronic truancy counts as educational neglect. Emotional, which is marked inattention to the child's needs. The child neglect by far is the most common form of child maltreatment. Sexual abuse includes fondling a child's genitals, intercourse, incest, rape, sodomy, exhibitionism, commercial exploitation through prostitution, or the production of pornographic materials. By far, the most common perpetrator is a heterosexual male who lives within the house, most commonly a stepfather. So the idea that homosexual males are, the most common predator is simply a myth. It is most often a heterosexual male who is the predator. So we have sexual abuse. Emotional abuse includes acts or omissions of parents or other caregivers that have caused or could cause serious behavioral or cognitive or emotional problems. So the family itself is obviously a key part of the context of abuse. So when you're looking at abuse, you need to look at the whole family. The interactions of the entire family needs to be considered regardless of who performs the violent acts against the child. About a third of the parents who were abused themselves when they were young abused their own children. And I saw that as a test question. So about a third of the parents were abused themselves. So just because somebody was abused does not mean that they will grow up to be an abuser, but about a third of those who abused were in fact abused themselves. And some but not a majority of the parents are locked into intergenerational transmissions of abuse. So we have some people that generation after generation after generation they are abusing. Has some of the consequences for child maltreatment: poor emotional regulation, attachment problems, problems with their friends, difficulty in adapting to school, psychological problems that could include depression, anxiety, separation anxiety disorder, other mental health issues. And it goes on, because the adolescents who experience abuse or neglect as children are more likely to engage in violent romantic relationships, delinquency, sexual risk-taking, substance abuse. And later, during adult years, these maltreated children, they often have difficulty establishing and maintaining healthy, intimate relationships themselves. So not only do they have difficulty in childhood, but then they grow up and we see not all, but some of them also have difficulty as adults. Okay, I skipped a couple concepts in the book. You do want to read over birth order. You want to read over the adolescents and how the impact of them growing autonomy and their parent relationships. I do want to talk though about children of divorce, and about 40% of children will experience divorce. So a couple things that we can do to help those children. We can explain a separation, explain that it was not their fault, explain that it's going to take time to feel better. It is not a quick fix. Keep the door open for further discussion. Provide as much continuity as possible. So for example, if the child participated in Brownies or Boy Scouts, you want to try to keep those things going if at all possible, and provide support for yourself and your children. So if you as the parent need therapy or you need to talk to somebody, it's kind of like in the airplane when they say to, put the gas mask on yourself first and then help children. Do that. Take care of yourself as the adult, and then also help take care of your child. So make sure as the parent that you're taking care of your own needs, because if you're falling apart, it's going to be very difficult to parent. A lot of people remarry. The divorces occur at a 10% higher rate for remarriages, so please be aware of that. About half of those children will have about half of all children whose parents divorce will have a step parent within 4 years. Remarried parents have some unique tasks. The couple must define and strengthen their marriage. They have to renegotiate the biological parent-child relationships. They have to establish step-parent, step-child, and step-sibling relationships. There's a lot going on. I often recommend therapy if things are not going smoothly. I know we all think, it's kind of going to be like the Brady Bunch, and it's very rarely works out like the Brady Bunch. And the last thing that I wanted to wrap up, and there's still some things in the book, so you definitely need to read the chapter, but I wanted to show this chart, and basically what this has is here are intact, never divorced, and here are divorced. And what it says is this is the percentage of children showing serious emotional problems. So for intact, never divorced, we have about 10%. And for divorced, we have 25%. So what this is saying is even if you're married, there's still about 10% of children that are showing severe emotional problems. And for divorce, we're having about 25%. So yes, there's more problems with divorced, but even with married, we still see problems. And one of the points that your book makes is that if the marital conflict is to the point that it's impacting the children, at that point, the studies show that the children may be better off if there is a divorce. In other words, if the parents are at the point where the fighting and the chaos and the hostility is impacting the welfare of the children, the parents cannot live together anymore. The children may actually be better off if the parents are divorced. And there's things that you can do then if you're willing to work together. And there are families who are divorced who are working together, and the children, 75%, the majority of them are not showing serious emotional problems. So the idea that, if somebody gets divorced, their child is going to have serious emotional problems, that is actually not true. The majority of them don't. And I think the key to that is the way the parents handle it. And if they're willing to put their bickering or their problems aside and have certain rules about the children, and they're willing to work together and do things for the children, then there can be positive outcomes. So, as always, please let me know if you have any questions, any comments. There's a lot that I did need to skip because this recording was getting long. But please let me know. I would be happy to discuss any of this with you. Again, my pleasure, and I look forward to hearing from any of you if you have questions.